webinar. Lots of questions will be answered, so please stay tuned, stay in tuned, listen closely because it's lots of information. Before we get started, I will introduce our panel of guests, starting with Sheila Gordon from the Athletic Trainers Association. We also have Amy Boozer, one of the associate commissioners here at the High School League. Danny Brooks, I'm sorry. Danny Brooks, an assistant commissioner here at the South Carolina High School League. We have Charlie Winsky, an associate commissioner. And up next to welcome you, our commissioner, Jerome Singleton. Mute.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Newman. I thank y'all for joining us this afternoon for this webinar. We'll take this time to share with you and answer questions about this year's spring sports season. We've been fortunate so far. Fall sports have been completed. The winter sports are coming to a close, and the spring sports, while it's challenging, it's off to a great start. For some of our member schools, this will be the most student athletes you've had on campus all year. So we got to be mindful of all the things we need to make this a safe experience for them. You've done great. You've exercised great teamwork this whole time. I don't want you to let your guards down now. Stay diligent. Work hard at what we're doing, and we'll get through it. We've got a great panel here before you. They'll all share some information with you. Please pay attention to it. And as Ms. Newman said, if there's some questions, don't hesitate to ask those, type it in, and we'll get it to them. And we will get them answered. A little housekeeping before we begin. The executive committee met this morning, and they made the following decisions on 2 items. One is the basketball finals date and sites could potentially and possibly be adjusted, depending on whether we can get a venue that can accommodate all that we need. We hope that we have one in place, but we're still working on it. We've got some more questions that need to be answered. The second one is the open season for fall sports will be held as normal, and that's held during our April and May period. Those are the 2 items that they've addressed. 2 other educational documents that you would have received this morning. One is COVID-19 return to play algorithm for athletes in competitive high school sports. And there's another one that deals with the NFHS revised guidance for the COVID-19 transmission during high school sports. These are only to serve as educational pieces for you, these documents. There's no mandate that comes along with it, but as you continue to practice the health and safety of all of our student athletes that are involved, I ask that you look at those and add those to your arsenal of things that you've been using all year. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the staff. Again, this seminar is supposed to be great information for you. Please don't hesitate to be a great participant. Thank you.
Up next, we invite Ms. Sheila Gordon to present any information that she feels is vital for spring.
Members, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon, and thank you, Commissioner, for allowing me to join this webinar today. The High School League's done a fantastic job in putting some guidelines in place. They've been in place for 2 seasons now, and even though it's been a challenge, we've really made it happen. So thank you to all the coaches and the athletes out there following the guidelines and doing their job. The High School League's done a great job of meeting with various health professionals and organizations such as the National Federation, DHEC, CDC, and even reviewing some current research to stay on top of the current trends when it comes to this virus and what we need to do to keep our athletes safe and continue through these sports seasons. So what I would encourage you to do is just stay the course to make sure that we continue to encourage these athletes and coaches to follow the guidelines that have been put before you today so that we can have a spring season for these young men and women that got cut short last year. So stay the course, and we'll get through the spring season, and looking forward to some final and state championships. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Couldn't have done it without you. You've been a great asset to us all year. Up next, we have Associate Commissioner, Mr. Charlie Winsky.
Thanks, Jamie. I'll share a couple items with everyone here. in regards to the spring sport calendar that's coming, that we're about to embark upon. Of course, everybody started practice on February 1st. Lacrosse, soccer, boys tennis, and boys golf and track and field. Your first scrimmage date was February the 8th. Of course, you see your first contest layout there. Lacrosse, February 22nd, soccer, March 1st, and then boys tennis, golf, and track and field, March 8th. And then, of course, you've got the playoffs all the way down. We'll go through the playoff finals here in a second. And then, of course, baseball, softball started practice. First scrimmage is February 22nd, and then your first contest is March 15th. All of this information is in the return to play guidelines. So if you need a refresher, please make sure you go there. And a reminder, all sports have 2 scrimmages at the varsity level and 1 scrimmage at the sub-varsity level this year. Our spring sport playoff schedule, boys and girls lacrosse. Of course, we only offer that state championship opportunities in the 4A and 5A classifications. Your dates are April 30 and May 1st, with April 30 being the 5A boys and girls. And then May 1st will be the 4A boys and girls. Those events are scheduled to take place at Irmo High School. In soccer, there'll be 16 teams per classification. And the playoffs will start on May 3rd. And then you see the finals here on May 13th, 14th, and 15th. We will play a 1, 4, and 7:30 game each day. And we will clear the stadium out at the conclusion of the game and bring the new group in prior to the next contest being played. And that event is scheduled to be held at Irmo High School as well. Boys golf, you see the qualifier, you can scratch out 2A, but 3A, 4A, and 5A qualifiers are May 10th. And then the state finals for Class A is May 10th. And then the state finals for Class 2A through 5A is May 17th and 18th. And the classifications have already made the decisions on the location for the qualifiers and the state finals. And that should be, if you have a question on that, you can reach out to your athletic director, principal, or your class president to find those locations. Boys tennis, 16 teams per class. Playoffs start May 4th. And then the state finals are May 15th. And we're looking at the Florence Tennis Center again for this spring tennis championships. And we're looking at 2 matches at 10 a.m. and 2 matches beginning at 12 p.m. Track this year, a little bit unique. We used to always run this event at one site over the course of 2 days. However, this year we'll be using multiple sites. So on May 21st at 9 a.m., we will have a track meet at one location. And then at 5 p.m., we will have a separate classification state final track meet at a different location. And then on May 22nd at 9 a.m., we'll hold one meet at one location. And at 10 a.m., another meet will start at a separate location. And in one of these meets, probably on this Saturday, we're looking at 2 classifications, being 1A and 2A, combining to run their meet at the same time. Baseball, softball this year start on May 15th. That's a Saturday. And there will be 4 4-team districts. In the past, baseball and softball have had 8 4-team districts per classification. This year, with only 16 teams per class making it, there is 4 4-team districts, so 2 districts in the upper state and 2 districts in the lower state. Those games will start on May 15th with the first round games. May 17th will be your second round games for your winners and your 2 losers. May 19th, which is a Wednesday, will be the losers bracket game to get back to the championship final. And that game will be held on May 21st with the winner bracket team hosting the losers bracket team in the first game, and if necessary, game 2. And that May 21st is a Friday. Once the winners from the district have been determined, the 2 winners from the upper state district or the lower state district winners will play each other in a best 2 out of 3 series beginning on May 24th. That'll be May 24th, 26th, and 28th. That is a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And of course, the May 28th is an if necessary game at a neutral site. And then the winner of the upper and lower series will play each other for a best 2 out of 3 series on the state finals, which is June 1, 3rd, and 5. And note that is the Tuesday after Memorial Day. And June 5 would conclude our state championship series this year, barring any changes due to weather or facility issues. And one thing of note, these times or locations could move and be flexible depending on how the season goes, where we are with weather, and what goes on with COVID between now and then. And the commissioner has the ability to make those, but if any changes are made, we will certainly share those with the membership in plenty of time. With that, I will turn it over to Miss Amy Boozer to share with you some highlights in some of her sports.
Good afternoon. Just going to cover just a few highlights for some modifications that have been made to some of our spring sports. We will start with golf and the same modifications and considerations that were in place for our girls golf season. Those modifications will be in place for the boys. I know some of our schools use the same coach for girls and boys, but if you have a different coach, one of the things, flag sticks will remain in. Players will not have to remove the flag stick. Post round, players with all of our sports, basically, we're taking away the traditional handshake or hug that should be exchanged at the conclusion of a round. And then scoring. Scorecards are not official. And with that, they should not be exchanged amongst players. Instead, the scores just need to be verified verbally. And then those scores would be given to the tournament director verbally at the conclusion of the contest. And then moving from golf into tennis, and again, same situation here. Some of our girls tennis coaches also coach boys, but if you have a different coach, same modifications and considerations that were in place for the fall, we've kept those consistent for the boys season this spring. So for the matches, at least 4 tennis balls should be used. Recommended that you mark 2 of those H for the home team and 2 of those V for the visitors. You can just use 2 cannonballs if you choose, 1 for the home team and 1 for the visiting. Scoring, the home team will be responsible for scoring. So they'll be the ones that will flip the cards or score sticks. And then changing sides, the opposite sides of each other will be how players will change their sides. Then moving from tennis, we'll look at girls lacrosse. Again, here we've eliminated the pre-game handshake. Coaches, we're going to limit attendees to 1 coach from each team and with the officials for the pre-match meeting. And then for the pre-game stick equipment check, basically the players will line up their sticks prior to the match, and the official will come and check the sticks for the players, and then they will whistle for the players to return to pick up those sticks. At the table, we want to limit this to just essential personnel. One thing with girls lacrosse, this has been a question that has come up, but we will be using the draw. We did not take the draw out, so we will be using the draw this season. Moving from lacrosse into softball. And all of this information can be found on our website. So, I mean, you can definitely go back and see the information we are highlighting as well as the other information that is there. Pre-game meeting will take place at home plate, and all participants should wear a face covering. That would be the coaches and the umpires. Important to remain 6 feet at this meeting. If an officials conference is needed during the contest, coaches and officials should wear a mask and remain 6 feet apart during the conference. We do cover that if a mask, if the coach comes out without a mask, the official will request for the mask to be put on. Then if the coach still refuses, they will be restricted to the dugout, and this could lead to an ejection. So coaches, be mindful of this. If you do come out to have a conference with an official, it is important that you have that mask and that you are pulling up the mask, as well as our officials have been given instructions on that as well. For your dugouts, we want to limit the number of players and personnel in the dugout. So making sure that you just have the players that are, pertinent to the team that need to be there, no extra scoring people. Those people can be located outside of your dugout. Each player and coaches, important to have your own personal water bottles. We did not put in to have home teams or visiting teams bring out their own game ball. DHEC has provided enough information that we found out that the contamination for this virus is not necessarily transmitted through the ball, but we do recommend that when foul balls go out and come back into play, let's sanitize that prior to it entering back into the contest. And then cloth face masks or face coverings are allowed during the contest, but important for pitchers, they cannot wear the optic yellow face covering. That would not be allowed for pitchers, but face coverings are allowed. And that covers all of the spring sports that I oversee. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Danny Brooks.
Good afternoon. The goal in track and field is always to get to the finish line. So it's important that we follow, as Commissioner Singleton has said earlier, we got to stay diligent to the protocols. One of the big points of emphasis for track and field, there are 17 events, so I won't cover all 17 events with the different suggestions per event. But it is important that we have sanitation stations, that they are available at your track meets. It is extremely important that our athletes continue to do their due diligence in making sure that they are wearing masks when not competing, that they are making sure that they're sanitizing their hands as often as possible, and that we follow those guidelines. I will get into a lot more detail during the Q&A part for track and field. Thank you.
I'll take you right into soccer since we're at that point on the screen. Not really any major modifications to the sport of soccer, as soccer itself is designed to be played with space and spacing between personnel. One of the couple things we want to point out in pregame, we want to suspend the pregame warm-up, the World Cup introduction and lining players up, and let's just get them on the field, do the national anthem and go. Certainly suspend the handshakes like everything else. The big thing is that we want to make sure we provide space for our officials to have their bags and or equipment on the sideline that's away from our team benches and not all on top of each other. Remember, there's nothing in the soccer rules that requires you to have both benches on the same side. That's a courtesy that you do, but you can have a bench on each side should you choose to do that. We just want to keep the number of bench personnel limited as well. I'm going to slide back up to boys lacrosse. Again, boys lacrosse designed primarily to play with space and away from each other. In soccer and boys lacrosse, players can wear a face covering, as can the officials, and we certainly encourage the coaches to have on their face mask in their bench area, and definitely when having conversations with officials to remain 6 feet apart and wear a face covering as well. Meeting of the face-off, we will have face-offs in boys lacrosse. It's a very important aspect of the game. We need to make sure the table personnel that's between both benches have adequate space to sit 6 feet apart from each other. In some cases, this may require you to have multiple tables up there. And really no major playing modifications in terms of how the sport will be changed. If there is a violation, officials are going to blow the whistle quick and award the ball. And again, you can wear the face shields on the helmet. Just make sure they meet the manufacturer's specifications. Lastly, I'll go to baseball, which is my last sport. Sorry to scroll through so fast. Baseball is very similar to softball. At the pregame meeting and exchange of the lineup cards, we want to try to keep everybody 6 feet apart. What we've recommended is that the umpires stand either in front of or behind home plate or separate of each other, and the coaches would stand on the home plate circle or where the grass meets the dirt around home plate. And again, like Amy mentioned, in baseball and softball, because a coach conference often ends up in a very tight quartered area, we have requested that coaches to go out and make this conference, you would have a mask on. The first request by the official would be nothing more than a courtesy. If you refuse to wear that mask and continue to have that conference or argue a call, the official will give you a warning. Again, continue to not wear the mask. You can be restricted to the dugout. And again, refusal to put it on after being restricted and continue to come will result in an ejection. This is nothing more than a safety piece for both our umpires and officials, because you get in tight quarters. You can end up with the spit coming out of the mouth during a conversation, especially a heated conversation. Dugouts, should be mindful of the dugouts. If you've got 27 kids on your team and you're only going to need 16 to 18 to play the game, we would encourage you not to take everybody to the game. And you can extend your dugout down the line away from home plate, but that would need to be marked with a dead ball territory and the opportunity on both sides of the field. That is all for our sports. Tammy, I believe we can move into the Q&A portion now.
Yes. Thank you so much, Commissioner Winsky, as well as the team that presented before you. Great job. I'd like to remind our guests, our membership guests, that we will utilize the chat option. If you do think of a question that hasn't been answered already, we do have several questions that were submitted prior to, but we still have the option of utilizing the chat. So let's get started. And I think I'm going to start with, we're going to go back to Assistant Commissioner Danny Brooks. He did mention a lot of information about track, but I wanted to get more in depth with that. One of the repeat questions that we got from membership was dealing with track meet attendance. Can you elaborate on how that should look and how that will work this season?
Exactly. I anticipated that question because we got that same question in the fall for cross country, where you have multiple teams that's coming together. And that's always a concern. We do ask that you limit your teams as much as possible. But the unique sport of track in South Carolina, our teams vary so much in size. They start with as little with small numbers like a team of 8 or 10. And then, of course, some of our larger schools go up to 100. So there's a big discrepancy in the pure numbers of our teams in the sport of track and field in South Carolina. And just as we did in cross country, there are facilities and places that limit spectators. And so we have to abide by those requests of limitations there. We do allow multiple team participation in track and field. Again, as we stated, the team sizes varies so much. Sometimes you have to have 2 or 3, maybe even 4 teams there to cover all of the 17 events. So that's allowed. But we do try to separate. We ask that you separate the athletes from the spectators.
Okay. That everything? Didn't mean to cut you off.
That's everything. I'm sure there are more questions pertaining to track and field.
Okay. Thank you so much for that information, because that was probably our most popular submitted question, was attendance at track. So great to see that there's so much interest in that sport. Sheila Gordon, are fall sports teams allowed to have weight room conditioning workouts at this time?
Yeah, of course, Tammy. I think we've got a majority of our teams that are working out during this time, and but I think we have to follow best practices. So following those recommendations that are set forth by the South Carolina High School League, the National Federation, DHEC, CDC, and even the current research, making sure that you're following the guidelines in the weight room, trying to keep the contamination of the virus without spreading and that kind of thing. And so, but going into, Tammy, I think part of that too is going into spring sports, using best practices there. Obviously, we want to limit cross-contamination as much as we can. So if you've got a fall sport athlete that may be participating in the weight room during school or after school and then go into a spring sport, of course, that ends up being obviously a local decision, but we do want to try to eliminate as much as we can cross-contamination between sports, because honestly, like we're talking about right now, we're trying to put in precautions for the spring sports because they've been, eliminated last year. So we want to make those guys the priority. But again, yes, it can happen. And because I know we've got a lot of dual sport athletes. So.
Yes. And that I would say that's a good problem to have, that so many of our student athletes are so active throughout the year and each season. Let's see, Charlie Winsky. I'm going to give you a couple of soccer questions, and I guess they all sum up to the same thing, but can you elaborate on whether there will be an upper state and lower state, or how the playoffs will work with the upper and lower in classifications with soccer?
Correct. Each classification has determined their own brackets for all spring sports, and if they have not sent them to our office yet, they're in the process of finalizing those brackets. And as soon as we have them, we'll get them posted. And the goal will be to have them up here in the next few weeks so that all our coaches are aware of what the playoffs look like. Of course, with the SCHSL requirements, you need a certain number of teams per classification to offer a state championship in that sport. So we're anticipating 9 state championships, and they would follow the bracket that the classification has set forth, whether that be a predetermined bracket based on where you finish in the region, or it be a seeded bracket based on how the classification has decided to determine.
Okay, so does that mean that there will or will not be a seating meeting?
If there is a classification that's going to use a seeded bracket, then yeah, they will have a seating meeting, and that information will get out to the members of that classification, so the ADs and principals will be aware.
Okay, great, thanks. Let's see, Amy Boozer, can you provide clarification on girls lacrosse using a draw of alternate possession during the contest?
Yes, the National Federation, they had in their recommendations that alternate possessions would be used, but after discussion in our office and amongst some of our officials and coaches, it was the decision to leave the draw in, as we felt like it was an important part of the game. So the draw will be what will be used. So no change to that for this year.
Okay, thank you. And sticking with lacrosse, Charlie, is there a minimum number of games required to be able to make playoffs?
It's a great question, Tammy. Each classification, 4A and 5A, both have a lacrosse committee that has established a guideline for how they will determine who makes the playoffs and the requirements for them making the playoffs. That can be found under lacrosse on our website. And I would encourage all the coaches to go to that section of the website to find out what those qualifications are to get into the playoffs for both 5A and 4A. Of course, if you're in classification of 1, 2, or 3, you would be in the 4A classification for lacrosse. If there is a minimum number of games and it looks like it may be an issue, I'm sure that the classification will have to revisit that at some time, hopefully sooner rather than later. But I would encourage everyone to understand the difficulty that we're all under this year, and especially a sport like lacrosse, where schools are very limited in number of teams around them and teams in their general vicinity, and try to play each other, a couple times inside their general area to prevent some schools from having to travel to the extreme ends of our state just to get a number of games in.
Thank you. And Mr. Brooks, going back to our track and field athletes, precautions and protocol for the high jump. Will the tarps be cleaned wide between athletes? How will that work this season?
A lot of the earlier protocols, we have learned that the contamination or the exposure wasn't quite what was thought. The TARP is one of the protocols that was suggested very early on that has since been removed as a necessity. It is a protocol that I think that would help you. So I do encourage that we still use that as much as possible, but it's not a requirement, I should say. Just as the early protocols had every other lane being used in your lane races, and now you can line up in each lane, as you're seeing currently in the indoor section.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Winsky, we had a couple of baseball, softball questions. I do recall you going into an example or explaining the fact of coaches wearing a mask during the contest. So you can elaborate a little more on that if you'd like, and I can go ahead and give you a couple other questions that deal with baseball and softball. But can you clarify, will coaches be wearing a mask during the contest?
Well, we've encouraged that coaches and officials and players wear a mask. It's not required. They certainly have the opportunity to. Softball, the pitcher, if they decide to wear a mask, and not wear the mask that's optic yellow or the color of the ball. Baseball, if a pitcher decided to wear a mask, they wouldn't be able to wear one that's white, which is the color of the ball. That would meet federation rules for all other sleeves and or gloves they would wear. But certainly if in all of our sports, we've encouraged a mask to be worn, especially by officials and or coaches. Again, not required, but if they're going to get inside of each other's 6-foot radius and have discussion, they need to put a mask on and respectfully do so. And of course, we outline the process for what happens if they don't in baseball and softball.
Right. Okay. And with pitch counts, what are the changes with pitch counts during this time?
There are no changes to pitch counts. Pitch counts is a whole nother safety issue that has come in play in the sport in the last few years. One that we have had in place, I believe, for 3 years now that has worked extremely well. And our coaches have become very adept to managing pitch counts throughout their season, but there are no adjustments to pitch counts as it concerns COVID. I think coaches have to make a very mindful approach to this season in terms of losing a student athlete for a quarantine or number of student athletes for a quarantine period, and being respectful of their arm being able to throw a certain number of pitches back at live speed on the mound. And that's something they would need to work with their players on to determine how much they've been able to do while on quarantine or while the team's been shut down.
Okay, great. And Ms. Boozer, we had several questions submitted dealing with, again, attendance and those precautions, as well as concessions. Can you elaborate on venues and the facility offerings such as concessions, or what the rules are for restrooms and so forth?
Right, and we've dealt with this with fall and winter as well. So going into the spring, it would not be anything different. The thing with restrooms, you want to put up signage that gives a maximum number of people that should be in there, whether that's one, whether that's two. It'll be up to your, obviously, facility. Make sure that there is appropriate marking for socially distancing while waiting in lines. That would be for the restroom and concessions. Using barriers at the concessions, maybe have a place where they enter to pick up food, and then a place where they exit, just to kind of keep your pattern flow the same. With concessions, prepackaged food is what should be sold. And all of this information can be found in our spectator venue guidelines as well, and we will have that posted. We have submitted to the Department of Commerce for spring approval, but everything that we have submitted is the same guidelines that we use for winter and fall. And also another good resource is to utilize that, I think it's the restaurant and bar guidelines for COVID that is on the CDC's website.
Great, and two important things that you said there, not been any changes, and that information is found on our website in those guidelines. So again, we can't stress enough that we want you to always stay in tune with our website and the information that we put out. Okay, and I think the last of our submitted, but we do have some questions in our chat that I'll get to. But Mr. Winsky, just a question on spring football practice guidelines. What are they? That was a general question that was thrown out there. So I know that's probably either a long answer or a short answer.
There will be spring football practice, as well as all of our fall sports will have their open period beginning with cheerleading in April, and our other fall sports will have their open period beginning May 1st. And I believe Commissioner Singleton spoke to that meeting this morning, and Ms. Gordon spoke to the necessary steps to take not to cross-contaminate. And then the reality is just be very respectful of the sports that are trying to have a season that they did not have last year, and understanding that, you know, parking lots, locker rooms, and other general areas of the school are being utilized by multiple groups at different times. So, you know, just be respectful of those other groups and give them a chance to complete their season when they didn't get a chance last year.
Exactly. Thank you so much. That completes our previously submitted questions, but we do have a few in our chat. So I will run through those really quickly. Another track question, and this would go to Mr. Brooks. In a track invitational where there are multiple teams, should the host school do temperature checks for all participants entering the facility?
That's a good question, and it depends on the requirements of that facility. We can't supersede what the facility requirements are. I just ask that if you're going to do that, that every participating school is aware of that.
Mr. Brooks, can I add to that, please?
Yes.
Ideally, we would like for the school that you're coming from to screen your participants prior to getting on the bus, simply because that may save your track season instead of somebody that's symptomatic getting on a bus and being within a confined space and riding to that invitational for a period of time. So ideally, you would like to screen all of your athletes before leaving and going to another school.
Let's see, in soccer, with only one captain attending the pregame meeting, will the other captains be able to ask the official for clarification?
If they've been identified as a captain by the coach, they would be able to by federation rule. You know, the big thing with limiting the number of participants there is we're just trying to cut down the number of people in that close quarter. Now, obviously, they're going to be moving during the contest, but, you know, and you can kind of argue that it goes against each other, but the reality is any opportunity to restrict close quarter contact, we want to do. And that pregame meeting does that. So at that pregame meeting, the head coach would need to inform the official of what players that are not present are captains so that they can identify them as captains throughout the contest. Failure to do so, the official may not recognize them during the contest as a captain.
Thank you. Mr. Brooks, will there be a limitation on preseason track meets?
Just as stated earlier in the webinar, scrimmages are limited to 2 for varsity and sub-varsity 1.
Okay. And we have a question about concessions, but I do believe Ms. Boozer has already answered that very thoroughly. So I think that concludes. If anyone has anything else.
Tammy, one more thing on the preseason. We've gotten several questions on this, and we didn't outline the calendar, but our preseason tournaments, schools can participate in preseason tournaments in that 10-day window prior to the first official contest date. And of course, those tournament games would count towards the total number of contests for the year, and it must be in a tournament in those events. And that's outlined in our handbook, and also must be sanctioned.
Okay. Well, thank you all for that information. Right now, that concludes all of the questions that were previously submitted and those that are found in our chat. I will now turn this over to Commissioner Singleton before we close out.
Okay, thanks again. To coin, I guess, a sports phrase, we're rounding the curve and headed to the finish line. Let's finish strong. Let's practice the safety measures. Wearing the face mask, social distancing, sanitation. This is the largest group of athletes that we will have throughout the school year, the spring sports season. Let's give them the best chance we can that they can have a season. Remember, when we started out, let's give them a chance to play. Even if there's no spectators, let's find a way to give them an opportunity. We're there, we're close. Let's not let our guards down. Let's continue to do it. I want to take this time to thank all of you that are so involved. Our member schools, our administrators and faculty, our coaches and staff, Booster Club and parents, our community supporters, our officials, and the media. You all are so valuable to the success of us meeting this challenge. Let's remain diligent. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy this moment and have a great spring sports season. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to the membership that participated, as well as our outside viewers. Just a couple of reminders. We will have a first ever wrestling press conference next week on the 18th. That will be at 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. right here on Facebook Live. First ever, and from the looks of social media, wrestling has a huge following. So we ask you to please join us for that. More information will be posted. And also at the end of our wrestling and basketball season, we will once again salute our female athletes and have some special guests for our winter tell-all pep talk with female athletes. So stay tuned for that information as well. Again, thank you all for joining us, providing great questions, and we hope to see you soon. And again, thanks for supporting our student athletes.